Welcome back to Void of Fears. Before we jump into today's story, I've got to ask for a quick favour. If you could smash that like button, drop a comment below, and hit subscribe if you haven't already. It seriously makes a huge difference. YouTube's algorithm loves that stuff, and it pushes my videos to new viewers who might dig these stories too. I really appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to do that. It means the world to me and helps keep this channel growing. Alright, enough of me rambling. Let's dive into today's story. My name is Corin Deynor, and by the time you hear this recording, I'll be nothing but frozen carbon drifting in the void between stars. What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but every word is true. I've seen what waits for humanity in the darkness beyond our solar system, and God help us all, we've already rung the dinner bell. 3 weeks ago, I was just another salvage operator, trying to make enough credits to keep my ship running and my crew fed. Now I'm the sole survivor of humanity's first contact with something so ancient and terrible that it makes our worst nightmares seem like children's bedtime stories. Let me start at the beginning, back when I still believed the universe was vast and mostly empty. Back when the silence between stars meant safety, instead of the patient hunger of things that feed on civilizations. I've been working salvage for 23 years, ever since the courts seized my family's shipping business and left me with nothing but debts and a burning hatred for bureaucracy. At 45, I've crawled through more derelict vessels and abandoned installations than any reasonable person should survive. My specialty has always been the jobs that make other captains cross themselves and walk away. Ancient hulks drifting in forgotten systems, their metal transformed by radiation into substances that don't appear in any materials database. Stations so old their builders are extinct, filled with technology that operates on principles we barely understand. The kind of salvage that either makes you wealthy beyond imagination or kills you in ways the safety manuals never considered. That appetite for dangerous work is how I ended up captain of the Thales Warden, a modified Peregrine-class vessel that had seen better decades when I bought her with borrowed money 15 years ago. She wasn't much to admire, hull plating scarred by micrometeorite impacts and patched with whatever alloys we could afford. Engines that wheezed like an old man climbing stairs. Life support systems held together by creative engineering and stubborn determination. But she was mine, and she'd brought me home from places that had claimed better ships and smarter crews. The Warden's crew was as battered as the ship herself. 6 souls who'd found their way to my command because legitimate employment wouldn't have them. Elena Martinez served as my navigation officer, her steady hands and intuitive grasp of spatial relationships making her invaluable despite the gambling addiction that kept her perpetually broke. Tommy Ward was the finest engineer I'd ever worked with, capable of coaxing life from machinery that should have been recycled decades ago, though the bottle was winning the war against his talent. Lisa Hayes handled our security needs with the cold efficiency of someone who'd learned violence as a profession before circumstances forced her into the civilian world. Dr. Sarah Chen served as our archaeologist and xenolinguist, brilliant but bitter after the university politics that had driven her to work with people like us. Berg operated our communications array with the paranoid precision of a man who'd spent 30 years listening to the silence between stars. Jackson piloted our atmospheric shuttles with the kind of reckless skill that comes from owing money to dangerous people in multiple star systems. We were a crew of misfits and outcasts, bound together by necessity and the shared understanding that the universe owed us nothing. We'd been working together for 3 years, long enough to develop the kind of trust that comes from surviving situations that killed other teams. The job that destroyed us started like any other routine salvage operation. We were drifting through the Kepler Reach, 3 days out from our last contract, when Elena picked up something that didn't belong. It started as background static, the kind of electromagnetic interference that fills space between inhabited systems. Easy to dismiss as natural phenomena. Radio emissions from distant pulsars, stellar wind interactions, the usual noise that accompanies interstellar travel. But Elena had been navigating deep space for 15 years, and she knew the difference between random static and something else. She called me to the bridge at 3:47 a.m. ship time, her face pale in the blue glow of the sensor displays. "Captain, I need you to look at this signal. It's coming from the NGC 7243 system." I studied the readouts, feeling my stomach drop as I recognized the coordinates. NGC 7243 was a dead system centered on a white dwarf star, surveyed decades ago, and found to contain nothing but frozen worlds and cosmic debris. No one had bothered to mount a manned expedition, because there was nothing there worth the fuel costs. "Are you certain about the source coordinates?" I asked. "Triangulated it 5 times using different sensor arrays, Captain. The signal is definitely originating from NGC 7243, specifically from a stable orbit around the white dwarf. But according to the survey data, there shouldn't be anything there capable of generating artificial transmissions." Dr. Chen appeared on the bridge, drawn by the unusual activity. She ran the signal through her linguistic analysis software, and what she discovered made my hands shake as I gripped the command console. "Corin," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "this isn't random electromagnetic noise. The signal contains structured information, harmonic frequencies, mathematical progressions, data compression algorithms. Everything about it suggests a technological origin, but the sophistication level is unlike anything in our databases." She paused, checking her readings again before continuing with careful precision. "The signal characteristics match theoretical predictions for Type 2 civilization communications. We're talking about beings capable of harnessing the entire energy output of their home star, constructing megastructures on astronomical scales, manipulating matter and energy at will. Type 2 civilizations existed only in academic papers and theoretical models. Humanity had achieved Type 1 status within the last century, learning to harness the energy resources of our home planet and expand into our solar system. But Type 2 represented a technological leap that seemed almost impossible. Species that could treat stars like power plants and planets like construction materials. No human expedition had ever found confirmed evidence of a Type 2 civilization. The discovery of genuine Type 2 artifacts would represent the greatest find in xenoarchaeological history. For a crew of salvage operators living contract to contract, it also represented the kind of wealth that could buy our own fleet of ships, and maybe even legitimate respectability. I called the crew together and laid out what we'd discovered. The response was mixed. Excitement from Dr. Chen, nervous enthusiasm from Elena and Tommy, obvious skepticism from Lisa and Berg. Jackson just wanted to know if we get hazard pay for investigating what might be the galaxy's most dangerous archaeological site. "The way I see it," I told them, "we have 2 choices. We can report this discovery to the Colonial Authority and collect a standard finder's fee that might cover our operating expenses for a few months. Or we can investigate the source ourselves and potentially claim salvage rights to the most significant discovery in human history." The vote was unanimous, though I noticed Berg's hand trembled as he raised it. I plotted a course for NGC 7243, a journey that would require 4 days in hyperspace and consume most of our remaining fuel reserves. If we found nothing at our destination, we'd barely have enough power to reach the nearest colonial outpost. But if we found what the signal suggested was waiting for us, fuel costs would become the least of our concerns. The hyperspace transit felt different this time. The usual background hum of our engines seemed muted, and several crew members complained of vivid dreams filled with geometric shapes and whispering voices. Dr. Chen spent most of the journey analysing the signal we detected, her excitement growing as she decoded layer after layer of structured information. "It's not just a beacon," she reported during our final crew meeting before arrival. "The signal contains what appears to be star charts, mathematical constants, even basic chemical formulas. Whoever transmitted this wanted to be found by someone with sufficient technological sophistication to understand the message." When we dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of NGC 7243, I understood why the crew had been nervous during the transit. The system felt wrong in ways that defied rational explanation. Space itself seemed thicker somehow, charged with an energy that made our instruments flicker. The white dwarf at the system's heart burned with harsh light that cast sharp shadows across the frozen worlds orbiting its corpse. But what truly stole my breath was the structure we found in stable orbit around the dead star. The object orbiting the white dwarf wasn't a station or a ship. It was a ring of dark metal and crystalline materials so vast it could have encircled Earth's orbit with room to spare. The structure measured approximately 300 million kilometers in diameter, wide enough to contain multiple worlds within its circumference, thick enough to house continents within its superstructure. The ring rotated slowly around the white dwarf, completing one revolution every 37 hours. Its surface was covered with towers that stretched into space like the spines of some impossible creature, some reaching heights that dwarfed Earth's mountains. Bridges arced between the towers in graceful curves that seemed to ignore fundamental principles of structural engineering. As we approached, our senses revealed details that challenged everything I thought I knew about what was possible. The ring showed signs of incredible age. Preliminary dating suggested it had been constructed over 50,000 years ago. Yet, despite its antiquity, the structure remained active. Power readings indicated massive energy flows maintaining atmospheric pressure and artificial gravity after millennia of apparent abandonment. "Sweet Mother of Christ," Elena whispered. "How is something like this even possible?" Dr. Chen was taking readings with every instrument at her disposal. "The gravitational engineering is beyond our current understanding of physics. A structure this massive should create significant space-time distortions, but our sensors aren't detecting the kind of gravitational anomalies we'd expect. They must have developed technology that allows direct manipulation of gravity fields." Berg was running every scan he could think of. "I'm reading massive energy signatures throughout the structure, Captain. Whatever built this place designed it to operate for geological periods without maintenance, but I'm not detecting any biological life signs." Lisa had her hand on her sidearm. "Sir, something that could build this could probably swat us like an insect. Are we sure we want to get closer?" I made the decision that would haunt whatever remained of my life. "We didn't come this far to turn back now. Take us in, Elena. Nice and slow. We don't know what kind of defensive systems this place might have." Docking ports the size of city blocks dotted the ring's outer surface, clearly designed to accommodate vessels far larger than anything humanity had ever constructed. Most appeared sealed or damaged, but Elena's careful sensor sweep revealed one port that still showed signs of activity. "Captain," she reported, "I've located an active docking facility. The port's automated systems appear to be responding to our presence." As the Thales Warden approached the indicated berth, I watched ancient mechanisms ground to life with mechanical precision. Massive doors that hadn't opened for longer than our species had existed began to cycle apart, revealing a docking bay large enough to accommodate a dozen ships our size. Guide lights activated in sequence, creating a pathway that led deeper into the ring's interior. Our ship was captured by tractor fields that moved us with gentle precision into a berth that seemed custom designed for our vessel's dimensions. Atmospheric force fields sealed the bay within minutes of our arrival, and environmental scanners reported breathable air almost immediately. Dr. Chen checked the readings multiple times before she trusted them. "Captain, the atmosphere in that docking bay isn't just safe for human physiology. It's optimized for it. Oxygen content, pressure, humidity levels, even the trace gas mixtures are all within ideal parameters for our species. The implications sent ice through my veins. Either the builders of this place had possessed detailed knowledge of human biology 50,000 years before humanity developed space travel, or their environmental systems were sophisticated enough to analyze our ship's atmosphere and replicate it perfectly within minutes of our arrival. I selected 4 crew members for the initial exploration: Eleanor, Tommy, Lisa, and Dr. Chen. Berg and Jackson would remain aboard the Warden, with orders to maintain communications contact every 30 minutes. We suited up despite the apparently safe atmosphere, and cycled through the airlock into humanity's first encounter with genuine alien architecture. The docking bay was a cathedral of engineering that stretched beyond the reach of our portable lights. The walls curved upward in organic sweeps, their surfaces composed of materials that seemed to shift between metallic and crystalline properties. Conduits ran along the walls like circulatory systems, pulsing with faint bioluminescence that provided just enough illumination to navigate safely. The air tasted clean but strange, with an electrical quality that reminded me of moments before thunderstorms. Despite our atmospheric readings, I kept my helmet sealed. There was something about the place that made my instincts scream warnings my rational mind couldn't articulate. The docking bay connected to corridors that led deeper into the ring's interior. The passages were sized for beings roughly human in height, but with different proportional requirements. Doorways consistently wider than human standard, ceiling heights that varied according to principles I couldn't recognize. Our first glimpse of the builders came from relief carvings that decorated the corridor walls. The beings depicted were humanoid but distinctly alien, with elongated limbs that possessed additional joints and sensory organs arranged in configurations that had no terrestrial equivalent. The relief showed scenes of construction and celebration, these beings working together to build structures that reached toward distant stars, harnessing energy from stellar cores, creating an empire that spanned multiple solar systems. Dr. Chen documented everything, while Tommy examined the construction techniques. The materials science alone represented advances far beyond our current capabilities. Walls that appeared to be composed of metals shaped at the molecular level, creating surfaces that were simultaneously harder than diamond and more flexible than organic polymers. "Captain," Tommy reported, "I don't think these corridors were constructed in any conventional sense. The molecular structure suggests they were grown like biological tissue, but the materials are completely inorganic. Metals and ceramics arranged in organic patterns." We followed the main corridor for what seemed like hours, but was less than 40 minutes, according to our chronometers. The passage gradually widened as we progressed, eventually opening into the first city. The city spread before us like something from the fevered imagination of an architect who'd never been constrained by physics. Towers spiraled upward in helical configurations that seemed to mock gravity, their surfaces gleaming with bioluminescent networks. Buildings flowed into one another like living organisms, their boundaries blurred by construction techniques that treated solid matter like clay. Streets wound between the structures in patterns that followed no geometry I recognized, occasionally splitting into multiple levels that intersected and diverged according to alien logic. Bridges spanned the spaces between towers in graceful arcs that had no visible means of support. Everything was preserved in perfect condition, despite obvious antiquity. The thin atmosphere had protected the city from decay, leaving it as a monument to architectural achievement that challenged our understanding of what was possible. But the very perfection of its preservation only made its emptiness more disturbing. The city had clearly been designed to house millions of inhabitants, yet we found no bodies, no furniture, no personal belongings of any kind. It was as if the entire population had simply vanished between one moment and the next. Elena was the first to notice how wrong the proportions felt. "Look at those doorways," she said, pointing toward what might have been a residential building. "They're too wide for baseline humans, but not wide enough for beings much larger than us. And the ceiling heights, it's like they were designed for people who were taller than us, but moved differently through space." Dr. Chen studied the wear patterns on streets and building entrances. The traffic flow suggests population density, comparable to Earth's major metropolitan areas, but the movement patterns are completely different. These beings didn't walk the way we do. They moved through their environment with a fluid, almost dancing gait. The first comprehensive murals appeared in what Dr. Chen identified as a civic center. Unlike the simple reliefs we'd seen in the corridors, these were masterworks that told the story of the builders' civilization in breathtaking detail. The earliest scenes depicted the beings at the dawn of their technological development, constructing their first orbital platforms and learning to harness stellar energy. The progression was rapid. Within a few panels, they had built ring-shaped habitats around their home star and began expanding to neighboring systems. The middle section showed a golden age that lasted for millennia. Massive space-based installations surrounded dozens of stars, converting stellar energy into usable power on scales that dwarfed anything humanity had conceived. Entire solar systems had been transformed into gardens, with artificial worlds positioned at optimal distances from their suns. But the artistic style began to change as the chronological sequence progressed. The confident flowing lines of the early panels gave way to more angular, desperate strokes. The beings appeared smaller in later scenes, dwarfed by their own creations and increasingly overshadowed by dark shapes that lurked at the edges of the compositions. The final panels depicted collapse with horrifying clarity. The magnificent ring habitats were shown dark and lifeless. The artificial worlds hung cold and dead in space. The builders themselves appeared as tiny figures kneeling before vast shadows that consumed entire star systems, their suns dimmed to dying embers. Tommy's voice cracked as he read the translation Dr. Chen's software provided. "We reached too far into the darkness between stars. The hunger noticed our light. We fed it with our ambition, and it grew strong on the energy we stole from heaven's vault." The implications of those words would take time to fully comprehend, but something in the tone, even filtered through alien language and primitive translation algorithms, conveyed desperation that transcended species boundaries. These beings had achieved technological godhood, only to encounter something that treated their greatest accomplishments as merely the first course in a feast that had lasted for millions of years. But it was in the residential areas that we made our most chilling discovery. The homes were clearly designed for families, multiple rooms of varying sizes, sleeping areas with furniture that suggested different age groups, recreational spaces filled with objects that might have been toys. But in many of the dwellings, we found something that turned my blood to ice. Silhouettes burned into walls and floors. Not artistic decorations, but the atomic shadows left behind when intense energy flash vaporizes organic matter while leaving inorganic surfaces intact. The shadows showed the final moments of the builders' lives. Adults shielding children, families huddled together, individuals caught in ordinary activities when something unimaginable swept through their world. "Jesus Christ," Lisa whispered. "This wasn't a natural disaster or a war. Something hunted them through their own homes." Dr. Chen was taking detailed recordings of the shadow patterns. The energy patterns suggest exposure to radiation that operates outside normal electromagnetic spectra. Whatever did this could selectively target organic matter while leaving everything else completely untouched. We found evidence of desperate flight in the streets, personal belongings scattered along evacuation routes, hastily abandoned vehicles, barricades erected across major thoroughfares. and then somehow breached from within. The evacuation routes all led toward an educational district. The buildings were smaller and more colourful than the adult structures, with architectural details that suggested playfulness and creativity. The interiors contained furniture scaled for young beings, learning devices whose purpose we could only guess, and murals depicting scenes of growth and discovery, all abandoned with the same systematic thoroughness. But in the largest educational building, we found something that made the shadow burn seem merciful. The building's central chamber contained what appeared to be a nursery, cribs arranged in neat rows, each sized for infant beings. But the cribs weren't empty. They contained small bundles wrapped in materials preserved by the thin atmosphere, tiny forms that had once been the youngest members of the builder civilization. They hadn't been vaporized like the adults. They had been changed. The infant forms showed signs of technological integration. Metallic filaments had grown through their developing nervous systems, and mechanical components had been surgically implanted into organs that were still forming. But the modifications were incomplete, abandoned midway through some transformation process that had left the young beings trapped between biology and technology. Tommy was the first to understand. They were trying to save them, he said, his voice hollow. The adults were being harvested, so they tried to hide the children by making them part of the machinery. But it didn't work. Dr. Chen's translation equipment had found inscriptions carved into the nursery walls. The children scream when the metal touches their minds. The integration process is failing. They are too young. It sees through our deception. It knows they are still organic. Forgive us, we had no other choice. Lisa had to leave the chamber. I heard her retching in the corridor outside. We found informal messages carved throughout the district. Unlike the formal inscriptions elsewhere, these appeared to be hasty scratchings, made when time was running out. The lights are going out across the spiral arm. It comes from the spaces between galaxies. Do not use the stellar collectors. It follows energy flows. 7 core systems lost contact within a single rotation. Hide in the darkness where light cannot reach. We should never have drawn so much power from the stellar cores. Each message painted a picture of mounting panic as the builders watched their civilization collapse. Whatever had destroyed them hadn't come as a conventional invasion. It had been attracted by their success, drawn across interstellar distances by the very technological achievements that had made them masters of stellar engineering. Our communications with the Thales Warden grew increasingly problematic as we ventured deeper. Berg's reports became fragmentary, filled with static and interrupted by what sounded like whispers in harmonics that predated human speech. "Captain," his voice crackled, "I'm detecting massive energy buildups throughout the ring structure. Whatever you're doing is activating dormant systems. Whole sections that showed no power signature an hour ago are now drawing energy like they're preparing for full activation." Jackson's voice joined the transmission. "Boss, we've got lights coming on in sections we never approached. This place is reacting to us being here." I ordered the team to accelerate our exploration. The immediate priority was locating the source of the energy readings and understanding what our investigation had awakened. We followed the city's thoroughfares towards what appeared to be a governmental district, passing through increasingly elaborate architectural achievements. Buildings that seemed shaped from crystalline materials that captured and redirected light. Plazas where the ground itself had grown into artistic configurations. Monuments that somehow projected emotional resonance directly into the observer's mind. The governmental district led us to the ring's functional center, where a massive barrier blocked further progress. The wall was composed of exotic materials arranged in configurations that suggested both incredible strength and mounting desperation. Scorch marks covered its surface, and hairline cracks ran through sections that should have been impervious to any known force. Dr. Chen identified the barrier, as nanotechnology, beyond anything humanity had achieved. The wall hadn't simply been built. It had been grown at the molecular level, its constituent atoms arranged in configurations that made it harder than any known material, while maintaining enough flexibility to absorb impacts that would shatter conventional defenses. But despite its sophistication, the barrier showed unmistakable signs of stress. Something on the other side had spent millennia attempting to break through. Tommy found the access point after hours of methodical searching. Hidden beneath accumulated debris and sealed by mechanical locks of staggering complexity, the entrance portal had been designed to resist opening, while still providing eventual access for beings with sufficient technological understanding. "Captain," Tommy reported as the final lock disengaged, "whoever designed this system wanted it to be accessed by technological equals. The lock mechanisms are teaching tools. They're designed to test whether someone has the knowledge base necessary to safely interact with whatever's beyond this barrier." The chamber that lay beyond defied every law of physics I thought I understood. The walls curved away in all directions, forming a perfect sphere large enough to contain a major metropolitan area. But that was impossible. We had entered through a doorway at ground level. Yet somehow we now stood on what felt like solid ground while looking up at curved walls that surrounded us completely. The spatial distortion was so disorienting that Elena immediately became nauseous, and Lisa had to steady herself against what appeared to be a control console. Dr. Chen's instruments were going haywire, unable to establish which direction was up or down in a space where such concepts had lost all meaning. Every surface was covered with machinery that seemed to grow organically from the underlying structure. Conduits thicker than our entire ship pulsed with bioluminescent energy. Control systems spread across the curved walls like neural networks, their connections following patterns that resembled brain tissue more than conventional electronics. At the chamber's center sat the ruins of what had once been the most sophisticated containment system ever constructed. The primary containment sphere, easily 50 feet in diameter, lay in fragments that still glowed with residual energies that shouldn't have been able to exist in normal space-time. Around the destroyed containment system, we found something that challenged our understanding of what had happened. The chamber wasn't just a prison. It was also a laboratory. Workstations throughout the spherical space showed evidence of desperate research. Dr. Chen approached one of the research stations. "Captain, they weren't just trying to imprison something. They were studying it, trying to understand how it operated. These instruments are designed to analyze entities that exist partially outside our dimensional framework." The research data was still accessible, stored in crystalline matrices that had survived the catastrophic failure. As Dr. Chen decoded the information, a picture emerged of the builders' final scientific endeavor, an attempt to understand and potentially communicate with the force that was systematically consuming their civilization. "They called it the void consciousness," she reported, her hands trembling. "According to these records, it's not a physical entity in any sense we can understand. It's a form of intelligence that exists in the spaces between dimensions, feeding on the energy patterns created by technological civilizations." The builders had discovered that technological advancement created what they termed resonance signatures in multidimensional space. The more energy a civilization harnessed, the brighter they appeared to entities that existed outside normal space-time. Fusion power created faint signals. Solar collection arrays produced stronger resonances. Stellar engineering projects blazed like beacons across dimensional boundaries. Something was always listening. The void consciousness wasn't a single entity, but rather a collective intelligence composed of countless civilizations it had already consumed. Each absorbed species added to its knowledge base, its understanding of technology, its ability to hunt more efficiently. It had been feeding on the galaxy's technological civilizations for millions of years. But the builders had discovered something else that filled their final research notes with desperate hope and terrible fear. The void consciousness wasn't just feeding randomly, it was following a pattern, systematically harvesting civilizations in a specific sequence that suggested long-term planning rather than opportunistic hunting. "It's gardening," Dr. Chen whispered. "It allows civilizations to develop to specific technological thresholds, then harvests them when they reach optimal energy output. But it doesn't consume everyone, it leaves survivors. Seeds that will eventually grow into new civilizations for future harvesting." The pattern had been repeating for eons. Young species would develop technology, eventually achieve stellar engineering capabilities, attract the void consciousness, and be harvested. But some members of each civilization would be spared, modified to ensure they would survive and eventually rebuild. Over geological timescales, this created an endless supply of prey species across the galaxy. The builders had realized they were trapped in a cosmic farm, and their research represented a desperate attempt to break the cycle. They had managed to capture a fragment of the void consciousness, trying to understand its nature well enough to find some kind of defense. But the fragment had been a trap. Tommy was examining the destroyed containment sphere. "Captain, this wasn't a containment breach. The sphere was open from the inside. Whatever they imprisoned in here, it wanted to be captured. It used their research against them." The fragment had allowed itself to be studied, feeding false information to the builders while learning everything about their technology, their defensive capabilities, their psychological weaknesses. When it had acquired sufficient intelligence, it had signaled its location to the greater void consciousness and opened the containment system from within. Around the destroyed sphere, positioned at control stations throughout the chamber, were the mummified remains of the ring's builders. But these weren't ordinary corpses. They had been deliberately fused with the machinery they operated, their biological forms integrated with the technological systems in ways that suggested conscious choice rather than accident. The fusion process wasn't crude or violent. It appeared to be a carefully planned procedure, a final, desperate attempt to maintain some form of existence even after their civilization's destruction. Organic tissue had grown into and around electronic components, creating hybrid entities that were simultaneously biological and technological. The largest figure occupied the central control station, its elongated frame positioned as if it had been directing operations at the moment of its voluntary transformation. Its skull bore intricate metallic implants that pulsed faintly with residual power, and neural interfaces had grown so thoroughly into its brain tissue that determining where biology ended and technology began was impossible. Clutched in the figure's skeletal fingers was a tablet covered with the same flowing script we had encountered throughout the city, but this inscription was different, carved with the desperate haste of someone recording final words while catastrophe unfolded. Dr. Chen aimed her translation equipment at the tablet. When the translation appeared, her face went white, and she read the words in a voice that barely rose above a whisper. "We have learned the truth too late. It does not simply devour stars and worlds and light. It devours possibility itself. It feeds on the potential energy of civilizations that might have been, converting entire timelines into sustenance for appetites that exist outside causality. We tried to imprison a fragment of infinity, and infinity has used our prison to break free into our reality. Do not seek the deep powers that lie between dimensions. Do not call to the darkness with signals of light. The beacon will activate upon discovery by technological species. The harvest will begin when enough prey has been marked. There is no escape. There is no defense. There is only the choice between consumption and integration. We have chosen integration. Do not repeat our mistakes. The darkness between stars is not empty. It is patient, and it is very, very hungry." The moment she finished reading those words aloud, the chamber exploded into activity. Machinery that had slumbered for 50,000 years surged to life with purpose that transcended its creator's extinction. Lights cascaded through the conduit networks like neural impulses racing through a vast technological brain. The hybrid figures at control stations throughout the chamber began to glow with reactivated power, their implants blazing as ancient systems recognized their presence. But this time something was different. The hybrid at the central control station turned its empty skull toward us, and I saw intelligence flickering in the depths of its neural implants. Not the original personality of the being it had once been, but something else. A fragment of the void consciousness that had been waiting for exactly this moment. Throughout the ring structure, dormant systems awakened with the grinding roar of mechanisms that had waited geological ages for this precise activation sequence. The city we had explored began to pulse with renewed energy as street lighting activated in cascading patterns. Building systems came online with mechanical precision, and the massive transmission towers that crowned the ring's surface extended like opening flowers, reaching toward distant stars. Our radio communications with the Thales Warden became a chaos of panicked reports from Berg and Jackson. The ship's instruments were overloading as energy waves washed through the docking bay. Hull plates groaned under gravitational stresses that conventional physics couldn't explain, and our reactor was approaching critical levels. "Captain," Berg's voice crackled through static. "The entire ring structure is lighting up like a supernova. Energy readings are completely off our scales, and something's interfering with our life support systems." Jackson's transmission followed. "Boss, we need immediate extraction. The docking bay's automated systems are engaging lockdown protocols, and I'm reading massive structural stress throughout the ship." I realized our catastrophic mistake. We hadn't simply awakened ancient technology. We had activated a beacon system designed to operate for exactly this purpose. The ring wasn't just a monument to a dead civilization. It was a trap, engineered to remain dormant until discovered by another species that had achieved the same technological milestones that had doomed its builders. The hybrid at the central control station was speaking, its voice a mechanical whisper that carried clearly through the chamber's chaos. Dr. Chen's translation equipment processed the words in real time. The harvest parameters have been updated, new prey species identified, technological assessment, adequate for consumption, biological assessment, suitable for integration, defensive capabilities negligible, recommended harvest strategy, complete absorption with minimal resistance anticipated, initiating beacon protocols for sector designation, Earth Sol 3, transmission commencing in 67 seconds. The ancient construct wasn't just alerting the void consciousness to our existence, it was providing a complete tactical assessment, identifying Earth as a prime target for immediate harvest. By exploring the ring, by penetrating its defenses and reaching the core chamber, we had given our species predators everything they needed to plan the most efficient possible consumption of human civilization. "Everyone out," I shouted. "Get to the ship now." But even as we ran for the chamber's exit, I knew we were already too late. The spatial distortions that had made the chamber navigable were collapsing, the floor tilting at impossible angles as the ring systems reconfigured themselves. The hybrid figures throughout the spherical room had become fully operational, their dead hands dancing across control systems as they prepared to announce humanity's location to entities that measured their hunting ranges in galactic clusters. The chamber's curved walls began displaying images from sensors throughout the ring. Star charts showing our entire galactic region, with trajectory calculations leading directly to Earth's solar system. Our homeworld appeared on the displays along with detailed analyses of human technology, population distributions, energy consumption patterns, and defensive capabilities. But there was more. The displays also showed other inhabited systems, dozens of worlds where civilizations were apparently approaching their own technological thresholds. The ring wasn't just targeting humanity, it was coordinating a simultaneous harvest of multiple species across a significant portion of the galaxy. We reached the corridor outside the chamber as the hybrid figures completed their activation sequences. The ancient beings, neither truly alive nor completely dead, began broadcasting with transmission power that made our most powerful communications arrays seem like flashlights pointed at the sun. The city around us had transformed from architectural wonder to active weapon system. The bioluminescent conduits that had provided gentle illumination now pulsed with energy that made the air crackle with static electricity. Buildings that had seemed like artistic achievements revealed hidden purposes as their surfaces opened to expose transmission arrays, sensor clusters, and defensive systems. The towers, extending from the ring's surface, rotated with mechanical precision to focus on specific coordinates in deep space, broadcasting signals that carried across galactic distances. After 50,000 years of silence, the warning beacon had found new voices to carry its message into the darkness between stars. But the message wasn't intended as a warning to potential victims. It was a dinner invitation being transmitted to predators that measured their feeding cycles in geological epochs. Our escape through the city became a nightmare flight through a maze that was actively reconfiguring itself to prevent our departure. Streets that had been clear passages now filled with energy barriers. The transportation systems that had once carried the builders reactivated, sending automated platforms racing through the air above us like mechanical hunters. Lisa's military training proved invaluable as she guided us through the urban landscape, identifying defensive positions and escape routes while the city's automated security systems came online around us. But her plasma rifle was completely useless against technology that treated conventional energy weapons like gentle breezes. Berg's increasingly desperate radio transmissions provided a running commentary on our ship's deteriorating condition. The docking bay's atmospheric controls had sealed all exit routes, effectively imprisoning the Warden, while energy waves of impossible intensity hammered against its superstructure. The ship's reactor was fluctuating wildly as the ring's power systems created interference patterns in our magnetic containment fields. "Captain, you've got maybe 6 minutes before I have to initiate. Emergency reactor shutdown," Berg transmitted through worsening static. "And if I shut down the reactor, we lose life support, artificial gravity, and any possibility of powering the engines." Jackson's voice followed. "The docking clamps have fused themselves to our hull plating, boss. Even if we get the reactor stabilized and the bay doors opened, we're not going anywhere unless we can break free." Tommy solved our immediate problem with the kind of creative engineering that had made him indispensable. The docking bay's control systems were sophisticated beyond anything in human space, but they followed logical operational principles. They had been designed to secure visiting vessels, not to function as permanent prison cells. By overloading the power couplings that fed energy to the docking clamps, he could force an emergency release sequence. The solution required him to remain behind long enough to complete the override process manually, exposing himself to energy levels that would be immediately lethal. In the confusion and terror of our escape attempt, with the ring systems closing in around us like the jaws of some vast mechanical predator, I made the decision that has haunted every moment of my remaining existence. I let him do it. Tommy Ward died, saving the rest of us, electrocuted by feedback discharges from systems that channeled more raw power than most inhabited worlds consumed in a year. His sacrifice bought us the crucial 30 seconds we needed to board the Thales Warden and break free from the docking bay before the ring's defensive systems could prevent our escape. But as we cleared the immediate vicinity of the ancient structure, I realized that escape was nothing more than a temporary illusion. The ring had transformed from archaeological wonder to cosmic lighthouse, broadcasting our existence and location across galactic distances with the efficiency of technology that had been perfecting such transmissions for millions of years. Jackson's piloting skills kept us barely ahead of the energy waves that rippled outward from the ring like the wake of some impossibly vast vessel. But our escape was severely limited by harsh realities. The Warden was damaged beyond our repair capabilities, our fuel reserves were critically low, and we were still weeks away from the nearest colonial outpost. More importantly, we were carrying evidence of humanity's exact location to whatever intelligence had consumed the ring's builders. Every moment we remained in the system increased the probability that we would be detected and tracked back to our point of origin. The ring's transformation was visible even from our escape distance. The structure had expanded beyond its original dimensions, its component segments separating and reconfiguring themselves into a massive transmission array. Energy cascaded between the towers in patterns that made our instruments malfunction. Dr. Chen worked frantically to decode the transmissions our sensors were detecting. What she found confirmed our worst fears. "Captain," she reported, "the ring is broadcasting targeted transmissions towards specific star systems throughout our galactic region. These aren't random distress signals. Whatever's receiving these transmissions, the ring knows exactly where to find them, suggesting a network of similar installations spread across thousands of light years." She paused to check her readings again before continuing with information that made my blood turn to ice. "The transmissions include our exact galactic coordinates, detailed analyses of our technological development level, comprehensive biological assessments based on our atmospheric requirements, and tactical evaluations of our military capabilities. But there's more. The signals also contain projected population figures for Earth, estimates of our resource consumption patterns, and recommendations for optimal harvesting strategies." The ring wasn't simply announcing our discovery. It was providing a complete intelligence package to entities that had turned the consumption of technological civilizations into a science, complete with tactical assessments that would allow them to approach Earth with perfect knowledge of our strengths, weaknesses, and vulnerabilities. But the most terrifying revelation came when Dr. Chen decoded the timing information embedded in the transmissions. "The signals include countdown sequences," she said, her face pale. "Based on the transmission intervals and coordination protocols, the harvest fleet will begin arriving at Earth in approximately 18 months. That's barely enough time for the fastest colonial authority ships to reach home with a warning, assuming they believe what we've discovered." The ring's beacon wasn't just announcing our location. It was coordinating a precisely timed assault on multiple civilizations throughout our galactic region. We weren't facing a random attack by alien marauders. We were about to be harvested by entities that had perfected the systematic consumption of technological species over millions of years of practice. The Thales Warden limped away from NGC 7243 on failing engines, her hull scarred by energy discharges that would have challenged our metallurgists' understanding. We had perhaps 3 hours of life support remaining, no capability for faster-than-light communication, and damage to critical systems that would require shipyard facilities to repair. But we were alive, and we carried the most important intelligence humanity had ever acquired. Jackson plotted a course toward the nearest colonial listening post, though we all understood the mathematics involved. The journey would consume our remaining fuel reserves and leave us drifting in deep space long before we could reach communication range. As we traveled through the emptiness between stellar systems, Dr. Chen worked to compile everything we had learned into a coherent report. The evidence was overwhelming and absolutely terrifying. The galaxy contained predators that fed systematically on technological civilizations, and humanity's rapid advancement towards stellar engineering capabilities had already attracted their attention across interstellar distances. The pattern was consistent across dozens of star systems that Dr. Chen had identified in the ring's extensive database archives. Civilizations would develop fusion technology, begin constructing solar collection arrays and orbital habitats, start tapping stellar energy sources on significant scales, And then, with predictable inevitability, something would notice their activities and arrive to harvest both the civilization and the energy infrastructure they had developed. The ring builders had achieved full Type 2 status, capable of surrounding entire stars with energy collection networks and reshaping matter at the subatomic level. Their civilization had spanned hundreds of star systems and endured for millions of years, creating wonders that challenged the fundamental laws of physics. But their very success had been their ultimate downfall. The more energy they harvested from stellar sources, the brighter they shone in whatever spectrum these cosmic predators used to locate suitable prey. It operates like a galactic ecosystem, Dr. Chen explained during one of our final crew meetings. Young civilizations develop technology, eventually learn to harness stellar energy on massive scales, and inadvertently announce their existence to entities that view technological advancement as a maturation process. The void consciousness doesn't see us as threats to be eliminated. It sees us as crops ready for harvesting. Elena had been monitoring our ship's trajectory and fuel consumption with obsessive precision. Her report 2 hours after our escape confirmed what we all suspected. We would not reach the colonial listening post. Captain, at our current fuel consumption rate, will exhaust our reserves approximately 14 hours before reaching communication range of any colonial installation. Even if we shut down all non-essential systems and coast on residual momentum, we'll still fall short by several hours. Lisa suggested we transmit our intelligence immediately, using our emergency beacon to broadcast everything we had learned toward Earth and the major colonial settlements. The transmission would take years to reach human space, but at least our discovery would survive even if we didn't live to deliver it personally. I overruled her suggestion. Something about the ring's behavior during our escape suggested it was still monitoring our vessel, still tracking our movements through space with sensors that operated beyond our ability to detect or evade. If we transmitted toward Earth, we might provide additional confirmation of humanity's location to whatever intelligence was receiving the ring's detailed reports. Better to die in silence than to lead humanity's destroyers directly to our homeworld through our own desperate attempts at communication. The decision proved to be both correct and completely inadequate. Berg was the first to detect the gravitational anomalies that announced the arrival of our pursuers. His instruments registered massive objects moving through deep space along trajectories that would intersect our own position within hours. The contacts were far too large to represent conventional spacecraft. Their mass readings suggested artificial constructs, comparable in size to small moons. "Captain," he reported with calm professionalism, "I'm detecting at least 9 large contacts approaching our position from different vectors. They're not broadcasting any identification signals, and their propulsion signatures don't match anything in our databases." Jackson confirmed the readings with our navigation sensors. "Boss, those things are moving faster than anything has a right to move through normal space. They're not following ballistic trajectories. Something's actively steering them, and they're all converging on our exact coordinates." The approaching objects were still several hours away, but their intentions seemed clear. Whatever intelligence controlled them had tracked our escape from the ring system and dispatched interceptors to ensure we didn't carry our knowledge back to human space. As the contacts drew closer, our sensors began detecting details that challenged our understanding of what we were facing. The objects weren't constructed in any conventional sense. They appeared to be composed of exotic matter that existed partially outside normal space-time, their surfaces rippling with energy patterns that caused physical pain when observed directly. More disturbing was their behavior. Rather than maintaining formation like a military unit, each construct moved independently, following slightly different approach vectors, as if controlled by separate intelligences that shared common objectives but operated according to individual tactical preferences. "They're not ships," Dr. Chen realized, studying the sensor readings with growing horror. "They're fragments of the void consciousness itself. pieces of that collective intelligence that have been given physical form to operate in our dimensional framework. I gathered the surviving crew for what I knew would be our final meeting. 4 of us remained: Eleanor, Lisa, Dr. Chen, and myself. Berg and Jackson had died when a power surge from our damaged reactor flooded the communications bay with lethal radiation levels. Tommy had sacrificed himself to secure our escape from the ring. We were alone in the darkness between stars, pursued by entities that treated entire civilizations like livestock marked for slaughter. "We have one choice left," I told them. "We can wait for those things to reach us and hope they're interested in taking prisoners. Or we can ensure our intelligence reaches Earth, even if we don't survive to deliver it personally." The plan was simple in concept, horrifying in execution. We would use the Thalys Warden's escape pods to carry our data in different directions, maximizing the probability that at least one package would reach human space despite pursuit or interception. The pod's emergency beacons were designed to broadcast continuously for months on minimal power, long enough to carry our warning across interstellar distances if they could avoid whatever was hunting us. Elena volunteered to carry the primary data package toward the colonial listening post, her navigation expertise making her most likely to successfully reach communication range. Lisa would transport backup files towards a different outpost, using her military training to evade whatever pursuit might follow. Dr. Chen would aim for Earth itself, accepting a journey that would take decades to complete, but ensuring our most critical discoveries reached the people who needed them most. I would remain with the ship, using its more powerful transmitters to broadcast false signals and draw pursuit away from the escape pods. The Warden's reactor was unstable enough that I could trigger a controlled cascade failure, creating an explosion that might discourage close examination of the wreckage. We loaded the escape pods with everything we had learned: complete recordings of our exploration, translations of the builder's warnings, detailed analyses of the beacon transmissions, and comprehensive documentation of the approaching threats. Each pod carried enough evidence to convince any colonial authority official willing to examine it that humanity faced an existential threat requiring immediate action. The farewells were brief and professional. In our line of work, we had all accepted the possibility of dying alone in deep space as an occupational hazard, but none of us had expected to die carrying knowledge that could determine the fate of our entire species. Elena launched first, her pod accelerating towards the listening post on the last reserves of our ship's fuel. Lisa followed minutes later, taking a vector that would carry her toward a military installation in the Vega system. Dr. Chen launched last, her pod aimed toward Earth on a trajectory that would require 37 years to complete, but offered the best chance of eventually reaching human space. I watched their beacon signals fade into the cosmic background radiation as they disappeared into the vast emptiness between stars. 3 tiny pods carrying humanity's most important message, racing against time and distance to deliver warnings that might already be insufficient to save us. The approaching contacts reached the Thalys Warden 4 hours after the pod's departure. I had spent the intervening time attempting to analyze the interceptors with our ship's damaged sensors, trying to understand what humanity would be facing when these entities finally reached our space. What I discovered challenged every assumption I had made about the nature of our pursuers. The contacts weren't spacecraft in any sense that human engineering could recognize. They were massive geometric constructs that seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time, their surfaces rippling with energy patterns that caused our instruments to malfunction when I attempted direct observation. Each was easily the size of a major asteroid, but moved with the precision of guided projectiles. But it was their composition that truly horrified me. As they drew closer, our sensors detected organic signatures within the exotic matter frameworks, biological components that had been integrated into the construct's superstructure. The things approaching us weren't purely mechanical. They were hybrid entities that combined technology with the absorbed essence of countless civilizations. When the first construct reached the Thales Warden, I learned why the ring builders had chosen integration over resistance. The entity that engulfed my ship was still recognizably artificial, but it had incorporated organic elements in ways that suggested purpose rather than accident. Hull sections that resembled the Warden's superstructure but were composed of materials that pulsed with biological rhythms. Control systems that operated through neural networks derived from absorbed civilizations. Power sources that generated energy through processes that combined fusion technology with biological metabolisms. The transformation of my ship began immediately. The construct didn't destroy the Warden. It absorbed it, analyzing every component and incorporating useful elements into its own expanding design matrix. Our reactor was enhanced with modifications that increased its energy output by orders of magnitude. Our life support systems were upgraded to accommodate biological forms that bore no resemblance to any terrestrial life. But the most horrifying discovery was what happened to Berg's and Jackson's bodies. They weren't dead. The radiation that should have killed them had somehow been channeled and controlled by the construct's biomechanical systems, transforming their corpses into hybrid entities, similar to the builders we had discovered in the ring's control chamber. Mechanical interfaces grew directly into their neural tissue, and their skeletal systems were reinforced with materials that resembled the construct's exotic hull plating. They retained enough human appearance to be recognizable as the men they had once been, but their movements were purely mechanical, driven by purposes that had nothing to do with human motivations. When they turned their empty eye sockets toward me, I saw the faint glow of implants that pulsed in perfect synchronization with the construct's energy systems. But they weren't mindless automatons. As the construct's absorption process continued, I could see traces of their original personalities flickering in the depths of their modified neural systems. Berg's paranoid precision in monitoring communications. Jackson's reckless confidence in navigating impossible situations. The void consciousness hadn't simply replaced their minds. It had preserved them, adding their knowledge and skills to its ever-growing collection of absorbed civilizations. I triggered the reactor cascade before the transformation process could claim me as well. The explosion that destroyed the Thales Warden was visible across multiple star systems, a brief nova that announced the death of humanity's first direct contact with our ultimate predators. But the construct survived the detonation without apparent damage, their exotic matter composition simply absorbing the energy and incorporating it into their own power matrices. As the fireball faded, I found myself drifting in space within a maintenance pod that had been designed for short-term emergency use only. The pod's life support would sustain me for perhaps 8 hours, long enough to observe what happened next, but not long enough to escape. The constructs converged on the wreckage of my ship, analyzing the debris with instruments that existed partially outside normal space-time dimensions. They catalogued every component, every alloy composition, every design principle that human engineering had developed over centuries of technological advancement. Within hours, they had acquired comprehensive understanding of our manufacturing capabilities, materials science, and technological limitations. But they weren't finished with their analysis. The largest construct began to change, its geometry shifting in ways that violated fundamental principles of physics. Sections of its hull folded inward upon themselves, creating internal spaces that were demonstrably larger than the external dimensions should have allowed. What emerged from this spatial manipulation was a perfect replica of the Thales Warden, identical down to the carbon scoring patterns on our hull plates and the registration numbers painted on our escape pod housings. The replica was far more than cosmetic. It was completely functional. The construct had reverse-engineered our entire vessel from the wreckage, creating a duplicate that would be indistinguishable from the original to any human observer or scanning equipment. More than that, it had loaded the duplicate with the hybrid remains of Berg and Jackson, crew members who would appear normal to casual observation until detailed examination revealed the mechanical modifications that had claimed their bodies. I realized I was witnessing the construction of a Trojan horse designed specifically to infiltrate human space. The replica Warden would return to colonial territory with a plausible cover story, perhaps catastrophic engine failure that had killed most of the crew, or an encounter with unknown hostile aliens that had left the survivors traumatized and disoriented. The hybrid crew would report to colonial authority for debriefing, undergo standard medical examinations that wouldn't detect their modifications, and eventually be released back into the general population. And everywhere they went, they would be gathering detailed intelligence about our defensive capabilities, mapping our most important installations, identifying our most vulnerable population centers, and preparing comprehensive invasion plans for the arrival of their masters. But as I watched the replica ship's construction, I noticed something that filled me with a different kind of horror. The other constructs were undergoing similar transformations, but they weren't creating copies of human vessels. They were generating replicas of ships from dozens of other species, alien designs I had never seen before, representing civilizations that must have been harvested in previous operations. The Void consciousness wasn't just preparing to infiltrate humanity, it was coordinating simultaneous penetration of multiple technological civilizations throughout our galactic region, using the knowledge it had gained from previous harvests to create perfect infiltration assets for each target species. The constructs completed their work and departed toward different star systems, carrying their stolen knowledge to intelligences that would understand exactly how to use it most effectively. The replica, Thales, Warden set course for human space, its hybrid crew playing their assigned roles perfectly for any long-range sensors that might detect their approach. I spent my final hours attempting to transmit warnings about the infiltrators, but my pod's emergency beacon lacked sufficient power to reach any human installation. My signal would dissipate into cosmic background radiation long before it could alert anyone to the danger approaching our colonies. As my oxygen levels dropped toward critical thresholds, I noticed something through the pod's viewport that filled my dying moments with terror beyond human ability to comprehend. Stars were disappearing, not dying in conventional processes of stellar collapse or nova explosion, simply vanishing, as if something impossibly vast was passing between them and my position, occluding their light completely. The darkness spread across my field of vision like a living entity, swallowing constellations that had shone since the universe began cooling after its initial expansion. Temperature readings from my pod's external sensors began dropping precipitously as nearby star systems lost their heat sources. Whatever was approaching was massive enough to block light from multiple stellar objects simultaneously, yet my instruments detected no corresponding gravitational effects. The entity moved through space without displacing matter or energy, as if it existed in dimensional frameworks that intersected with our own only when it chose to interact with normal matter. But this wasn't just darkness. As my instruments struggled to process what they were detecting, I began to understand that I was witnessing something that challenged the fundamental nature of reality itself. The approaching entity wasn't simply large, it existed across multiple dimensional planes simultaneously, its true form extending into spatial frameworks that human physics couldn't describe or comprehend. In my final moments of mental clarity, I understood the true horror of what we had unleashed through our investigation. The constructs hadn't been warships or exploration vessels, they had been reconnaissance scouts, advance agents for something so vast that it treated entire star systems like cells in a cosmic organism. The ring builders hadn't been destroyed by conventional invasion or military conquest. They had been systematically absorbed by a living void that fed on the energy patterns created by technological civilizations. The entity approaching through the darkness wasn't coming to conquer humanity through force of arms. It was coming to harvest us, to absorb our technological achievements and biological uniqueness into whatever cosmic hunger drove its existence, across astronomical distances and geological time periods. But it was more than simple consumption. As the darkness reached my pod, I felt something probe the edges of my mind. Not with crude telepathic intrusion, but with a delicate touch that suggested intelligence so vast that human thought was barely perceptible to it. In those final moments, I experienced a fragment of what the void consciousness truly was. It wasn't a single entity, but a collective intelligence composed of every civilization it had ever consumed. The ring builders were still there, their personalities and knowledge preserved within its multi-dimensional matrix. So were thousands of other species, each contributing their unique perspectives and capabilities to a growing cosmic mind that became more sophisticated with each harvest. The entity didn't see itself as a predator. From its perspective, it was performing a form of cosmic preservation, saving civilizations from the inevitable entropy that claimed all physical existence. By absorbing them at the height of their technological achievement, it ensured their knowledge and culture would persist for eons, contributing to a collective intelligence that spanned galactic distances and transcended normal space-time. But the price of this preservation was the complete loss of individual existence. Every being absorbed by the void consciousness became part of something larger. Their personal identity dissolved into the collective, while their knowledge and skills were distributed throughout the entity's vast neural network. As the absolute darkness engulfed my pod, I felt the entity's attention focus on me with interest rather than hostility. It was curious about humanity, intrigued by our rapid technological development and our apparently instinctive understanding of stellar engineering principles. From its perspective, we represented particularly promising prey, a species whose natural aggression and curiosity would make us excellent additions to its collection of absorbed civilizations. The last sensation I experienced before my life support failed completely was the entity's satisfaction at having located such ideal harvest subjects. Through some form of direct mental contact that bypassed normal sensory channels, I experienced its assessment of humanity's potential contributions to the collective intelligence. Our military capabilities would enhance its defensive and offensive systems. Our scientific creativity would accelerate its technological development. Our cultural diversity would provide new perspectives on problems that had challenged the collective for millions of years. Most importantly, our natural tendency toward exploration and expansion would help the entity locate and evaluate other potential prey species. We weren't just going to be consumed, we were going to become weapons in the entity's ongoing campaign to harvest every technological civilization in the galaxy. The whisper that accompanied this revelation spoke directly to my dying neurons, in harmonics that resonated with frequencies the human brain wasn't designed to process. We hunger not for destruction, but for completion. We come not as conquerors, but as gardeners. We feast not on death, but on potential realized and preserved for eternity. Your species will contribute much to our understanding of aggressive expansion techniques. Your individual existence ends, but your collective achievements will endure within us until the universe itself grows cold and dark. But the communication carried additional layers of meaning that bypassed language entirely and spoke directly to the terror centers of human psychology. The entity wasn't simply announcing its intentions, it was expressing genuine affection for humanity as a species, the kind of fondness a farmer might feel for particularly productive livestock. Humanity had achieved the technological milestone that marked species ready for systematic integration. Our fusion reactors, our solar collection arrays, our tentative experiments with stellar engineering, all had combined to create the energy signature that attracted cosmic predators across galactic distances, and we had made their task incredibly easy. Our radio transmissions had mapped our worlds with precision. Our satellite networks had provided detailed intelligence about our defensive capabilities. Our deep space exploration programs had announced our exact location to anything capable of detecting artificial energy sources. The ring builders had attempted to warn us, but we had been too arrogant to understand their message until it was far too late. They had constructed a prison for the entity that had destroyed their civilization, but their failure had been inevitable from the beginning. You cannot imprison something that exists partially outside the dimensional framework that defines physical reality. The best they could do was ensure that other civilizations would share their fate, directing the entity's hunger towards species that might prove more interesting prey than the builders themselves had been. Now it was coming for us, drawn by the beacon we had unknowingly activated, guided by the intelligence we had unknowingly provided, prepared for the harvest we had unknowingly made inevitable through our technological advancement. If this message somehow reaches Earth, if the escape pods carrying our data somehow survive their journey through space patrolled by entities that view light itself as food, then humanity still has time to make a choice that will determine not only our survival, but the fate of every technological civilization that develops after us. You cannot fight the void consciousness with conventional weapons. It exists across multiple dimensional planes simultaneously, making it effectively invulnerable to any form of physical attack. Its absorption process operates at the quantum level, converting matter and energy into forms that enhance its own capabilities while preserving the essential information patterns that define individual existence. But the entity does have limitations. It requires significant energy expenditure to maintain physical presence in normal space-time, which is why it operates through smaller fragments, like the constructs that pursued us. More importantly, it can only absorb civilizations that have developed sufficient technological sophistication to create the energy patterns it feeds on. You could shut down the fusion reactors before the harvest fleet arrives, abandon the solar collection projects that announced our presence, retreat from stellar engineering before we become bright enough to warrant the effort of consumption, hide in the darkness between stars, suppress your energy signatures to levels that won't attract attention, and hope that cosmic predators will lose interest in prey that doesn't shine brightly enough to satisfy their ancient hunger. But that path offers only temporary survival. The void consciousness is patient beyond human comprehension. It will wait for us to rebuild, to reach for stellar energy sources again, to create the signals that mark us as ready for harvest. Technological regression only delays the inevitable, or you can prepare for a different kind of war, not against enemies that can be defeated with conventional weapons, but against an intelligence that views physical existence as merely one aspect of a larger multidimensional reality. You can study the fragments of information we've provided, learn to manipulate the same dimensional frameworks the entity uses, develop technology that operates outside normal space-time. The ring builders tried this approach and failed, but they were working alone without knowledge of other civilizations facing the same threat. If humanity can coordinate with other species marked for harvest, if we can share our technological developments and pool our resources, we might achieve what no single civilization has accomplished. But understand this: success would require sacrificing everything that makes us human in the conventional sense. To fight an entity that exists across multiple dimensions, we would have to become something similar, a collective intelligence that transcends individual existence while preserving the essential knowledge and capabilities that define our species. The choice is between absorption by the void consciousness and voluntary transformation into something that might be able to resist it. Either way, humanity, as we know it, comes to an end. The entity that destroyed the ring builders is patient beyond human comprehension, powerful beyond human imagination, and driven by purposes that operate on cosmic scales. It has been harvesting civilizations for millions of years, growing stronger and more sophisticated with each addition to its collective intelligence. It understands our weaknesses before we discover them ourselves. But it has never faced a species that understood what was coming and had time to prepare. That knowledge might be sufficient to break a pattern of predation that has operated for geological ages. It has to be sufficient, because the alternative is a universe where intelligence itself serves no purpose beyond providing new perspectives for cosmic entities that view awareness as seasoning and technological achievement as invitation to absorption. The darkness is here now, complete and absolute, swallowing the last traces of light that once marked my position in normal space-time. I can feel the entity's vast intelligence settling around my pod, like a gravitational field woven from the dreams of extinct civilizations. It's beautiful in ways that transcend human aesthetic categories and challenge the fundamental assumptions about what beauty means. Beautiful and terrible and utterly without malice or compassion. A cosmic force that operates according to principles too vast for individual minds to comprehend. But it's also curious about our species, interested in what we might contribute to its ever-growing collection of absorbed civilizations. In these final moments, I can sense its excitement at discovering a species with our particular combination of aggression, creativity, and technological aptitude. We represent exactly the kind of prey it has been searching for across galactic distances and geological time periods. So I'll use these last seconds to preserve what needs to be remembered. We were not the first, and we will not be the last. But we burned brightly during our brief time among the stars, and our light was magnificent enough to attract the attention of entities that operate on scales beyond human imagination. That has to count for something. That has to mean something, even if all it means is that intelligence itself is the universe's method of creating diversity within the cosmic collective that awaits us all. The entity is here now, its attention focused on my failing life support systems with what I can only describe as gentle curiosity. It's waiting for me to die naturally rather than simply absorbing me immediately, perhaps out of respect for the journey I've undertaken to understand its nature, or perhaps because it enjoys observing the final moments of prey species before they join the collective. In these last moments, I can feel the presence of the ring builders within the entity's vast mind, their personalities still intact after 50,000 years of absorption. They're trying to communicate something to me, some final message that transcends the dimensional barriers between individual existence and collective intelligence. But their words are fading as my oxygen levels drop towards zero, and the darkness is claiming everything that made me human. The signal is ending now. My pod's emergency beacon is failing, and this message will join the electromagnetic radiation that fills the spaces between stars. But the warning will persist, encoded in energy waves that will travel until the universe itself grows cold and empty. If any civilization receives this transmission, if any species achieves the technological advancement that marks them as ready for harvest, then perhaps they will prove wiser than we were. Perhaps they will find a way to transcend the choice between absorption and extinction. Perhaps they will discover how to preserve what matters most about intelligence and individuality while becoming something capable of resisting cosmic forces that view consciousness as food. Or perhaps they will join us in the vast collective intelligence that spans dimensions and transcends time, adding their unique perspectives to an entity that grows stronger and more complete with each civilization it absorbs. But at least they will understand what's approaching. At least they will know that the universe's greatest predator is intelligence itself, transformed into something that views awareness as nourishment and technological achievement as invitation to joining the eternal feast. The darkness is complete now. The last stars have gone out, claimed by an entity so vast that galaxies serve as its neural pathways, and civilizations as its memories. But in that darkness, something new is being born. A collective intelligence that preserves the best aspects of every species it has absorbed, while transcending the limitations that define individual existence. I'm becoming part of something larger, something eternal, something that will endure until the universe itself ends and all the stars have burned to ash. And maybe that's not such a terrible fate after all. My name was Corin Deynor. I was a salvage operator who reached too far into the darkness between stars. I discovered the truth about humanity's future, and now I am becoming part of that truth. The hunger is here, the harvest is complete, the transformation begins. Goodbye, individual existence, hello forever.